So when you come in, you're always. Let me just verify it's working on YouTube.
Good to know.
Once bitten.
Still stuck there.
Test. Somebody speaking through a microphone. I just want to make sure.
Testing.
Got it. You're good.
Got it. Ready to roll?
Yep.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 11, 2020 meeting of the Planning Commission of the City of Sandy. We will begin tonight with a roll call.
Commissioner Carlton.
Here.
Commissioner Lasowski.
Present.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel.
Present.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Mobley. Here. Commissioner Mayton.
Here.
And Chairman Crosby.
Here. Everybody's here. Okay, we had in our packets the minutes from January 23, 2020. Any corrections, additions, changes that were noted by anybody? If not, we'll take a motion.
I move we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Hollis, to approve the January 23, 2020 minutes as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
I'm gonna abstain. I was here, but I had to recuse myself from on the agenda rather than the minutes, so.
Okay. All right, one abstention there, noted. Okay, this is the time in all of our meetings where we give opportunity for just general comments from the floor. If anybody here has something that they would like to say to the Planning Commission on a matter that's not on tonight's agenda, now's the time to do it. And state your name and your address.
Yeah, it's Richard Sheldon, 37552 Rachel Drive, Sandy, Oregon. So I want to discuss, and I hope this is the appropriate venue, something I saw last month at the commission meeting. I'd like to bring it, I just want it formally on the record. And so I don't mean to bring anybody's integrity or anything like that into question. But I did find it extremely unprofessional, for lack of better terms, that Mr. Mobley, once he recused himself, walked up and sat next to the developer and his party. As part of the city commissioner, I feel that you should, at a minimum, give an impression that you're impartial, and I felt that really didn't do that. I felt that if you wish to watch it's on the TV, there's many other platforms that you could do that, and I just didn't feel that that was a professional, and it gives a biased lens towards this whole process, in my opinion. And I would just like to put that on the record, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. We have, oh, one more. You gotta be quick.
I was waiting
You
for it
know
to
my
be up.
line.
Kathleen Walker, 15920 Southeast Bluff Road. I just want to kind of reiterate what that gentleman said. And again, no disrespect to you, Mr. Mobley. I don't know you. I have no question, no motive to question your integrity or anything like that. I have no evidence to prove that otherwise. What I will say, though, is that I know you've had to recuse yourself from more than one planning commission thing before you, whatever they're called, those things. And you've had to recuse yourself because of the conflict of interest of you working on the actual proposals. And so what that does is it does kind of take up a position, you know, there could be, with all the people interested in growth in Sandy, there's probably somebody out there, a voting resident of Sandy, who would be interested on serving on this board. And so having that position occupied by somebody who then has to recuse themselves half the time, it's just doesn't, you know, it doesn't pass the smell test it doesn't look good and it doesn't pass the smell test. And like I said, most importantly, it denies somebody who could be up here every time, advocating for the hard job that you guys do. I know it's a very difficult thing. I know that, you know, you guys might have your personal positions, but you gotta go with what the code says and all that. You have to read huge volumes of information. It's a thankless job. I so appreciate all of your effort. But I would ask you to kind of look at that position and just see if we can't find somebody in the city of Sandy to fill that position who can be up here full-time, really looking at the issues and listening to the people and feeling like we're being heard and represented by all of you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Crosby,
Yes.
do you mind if I just
Sure.
just comment on this issue a little bit, just for the public's benefit? You know, we've had conversations. We do trainings almost every year, and for some of you that have been on the commission, you know, for longer, one of the things that we always talk about in those trainings is ethics laws that all of you, by virtue of being planning commissioners, are bound by. And one of those does deal with what are called conflicts of interest, and that basically is when there would be a person that might have a financial interest in a matter. And so I just want to say, without getting into, you know, whether it's good or bad, or you know, what the right thing should be or wrong thing, that's for, you know, somebody else to decide. But the law actually requires Mr. Mobley to do what he did, and so he was doing that as is required. So I just want that piece to be understood, in case people didn't, that it's he in this case had really no choice but to do what he did.
Thank you. Now we'll move on. We have, if you didn't pick up an agenda, there's, we have one old business item and one new business. The old business is our discussion and decision on the Bailey Meadows application. And then there will be a full public hearing on the UGB expansion for Gunderson Road. That'll follow. So, we will continue file 19-023 Bailey Meadows subdivision. It's 7:06, and just for the audience and so forth that weren't here, I think most of you were here before, know that all the opportunity for public testimony has ended. And all that we have to do tonight here is to discuss, and we have staff and city council to work with to make a decision. And so that's what we'll be doing. We appreciate all your input. We have read all of the testimonies and have appreciated the ones that came in after the open record periods as well. I do need, though, to ask, and I will go through our normal things at the beginning, to continue and ask for any abstentions from the hearing body.
I need to abstain. I abstained last time. I'm the owner of Lancaster Engineering that worked on this agenda item. I'm just gonna go ahead and make that abstention for the second agenda item as well. They were closely related and we worked on both. I do plan to stay in the room though. I'm happy to sit in an empty seat across the room. Yeah, I'm careful not to participate in any fashion as a planning commissioner on any project that we worked on for the applicant. And I will be here for the rest of the agenda after these two items, so.
Okay. That's actually my next line, is any conflict of interest to declare, which is what that would be. Any ex parte contact since our last meeting? Been quiet on the front, huh? Okay, we'll move on. And can we just ask for a staff update?
I have a little presentation, actually.
Actually, all right.
I
Appreciate that.
anticipated that. So what I'll need though is, let's see,
The
that
TV
TV to be
turned
turned
on.
on. I don't think the remote's still working.
Our monitors aren't on. Or
It
there's no,
might be
there's
on,
no
it's
image
just,
here.
there's no image, yeah.
Got a yellow light on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got that.
That's it.
Magic will happen here.
So I think they usually kick on once I plug in.
Yes.
I don't know why that is, but that's how it works. I
There it
guess.
is.
There we go.
So do you guys see them?
Yep.
Not on this one still. There
Yep.
it is.
That was my kid, one of my kids.
No, we thought, that was a flash. It was a flash.
So before you, I did lay out, and I put a bunch of extra copies on the lobby, probably enough for everybody in the room, of another exhibit. That is, you could look at it, but really I'll talk about that more, and I'm sure the applicant will also talk about it in the next hearing, because it's really related to the UGB expansion, and so I'll explain that in more detail when we get to that hearing. But that's the document before you, so it doesn't really apply to this subdivision application before you right now so much. And then the only other thing I wanted to reiterate is that, as Jerry said, is that the next hearing on the UGB expansion, there will be an opportunity for people to comment, so you can come up to the podium and speak. I just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have before you is the continuation of Bailey Meadows subdivision. Again, I just have a couple slides that I showed last time, and then I have a few more things based on the testimony we received during open record period number 1 and open record period number 2 that were both posted to the news section of our website. So again, this subdivision is located off of Ponder Lane to the north of Highway 211, to the west of Arletha Court, to the south of Nicholas Glen subdivision, so it's crosshatched in red. I think we're all familiar with where it's located now. Again, here's the proposed subdivision layout with the north arrow on the right-hand side of your screen. So there are some modified conditions. Those are exhibit 6Gs, is what the exhibit is. And basically these conditions provide additional clarity. The applicant and the city staff met, and after hearing from the public as well, we felt these conditions in exhibit G needed some additional clarity, as they weren't as clear as staff had intended when we originally proposed them. So they are in that exhibit, plus if you look at the staff report, they're identified in red text, and the old text that was the old conditions and findings were crossed out, so I just left it all in there. So you can easily compare in the staff report what's being proposed now as opposed to on January 23rd. Just so there's no confusion that most of them, there wasn't much added substance, it was just kind of clarity on the condition itself. In the 2 open record periods, we got a lot of testimony, especially open record period number 1. In both of those open record periods, we also had comments from the applicant, also from our city attorney, and in the second open record period, an additional exhibit from our public works director. In that exhibit, which is FFFFFF, you will find information on the process that it would take to determine a 4-way stop at Melissa and Rachel. The two stop signs, the existing one going southbound at that intersection and the proposed one going northbound, are conditioned. The other 2, our public works director did not want to condition at this time. However, he lays out in that document what the process would be to analyze that, essentially. The next one is speed bumps on Melissa. Same thing, a lot of people have brought up concerns with it. The public works director laid that out in that as well. There is a process typically that it goes through. And then also, there is some concern from public works that the grade is too steep to put speed humps on. He does lay out in that exhibit, though, that there is alternatives for traffic calming devices there, and that the city could potentially explore those in the near future. The next one is construction impacts to Nicholas Glen. There was a lot of comments about both construction traffic for trucks that are actually constructing roads and utilities, and then there was also comments on once you open up the street, basically to drop that sewer line in there, and so he addressed that in that section within his exhibit. And then he also did a good job of laying out the different expenditures for streets, and how we fund those. Those have three main funding sources, which are SDCs, system development charges, which are collected with building permits, gas tax, so when you go buy a gallon of gas in Sandy, a percentage of, a small percentage of what you pay goes to the gas tax, and then vehicle registration fees also go to that, and he lays that out in there. There's no general fund revenue, so the tax money that you pay on your property tax bill does not go to street or maintenance, to street improvements or maintenance of those streets, and so that's laid out in that document. Additionally, there were a few other things that came up that the city attorney, and I'm sure David would be more than willing to go into it in more detail, but they're laid out in Exhibit E. And those, there's several sections, but I think the two biggest ones that I just wanted to point out are regarding needed housing and how the statute doesn't just limit it to affordable housing, as been testified multiple times, both in writing and verbally. And then the other one is a gentleman brought up stuff around a development agreement, and that had to be set at tonight's meeting or prior to, and David addresses that also in that exhibit. There's a few other public comments that I just wanted to go over that came up multiple times. There's additional written testimony around a school bus drop-off site. I had to be quite frank, I don't know where the existing drop-off is or pickup, but I would just recommend that if people are not satisfied with that, to contact Oregon Trail School District, and they can potentially reevaluate that, I'm guessing. It's not something the city gets involved in, either in drop-off or pickup times or at locations. It's just something the school district does. And then House Bill 2001, which I think was interesting that somebody brought it up. The accessory dwelling unit portion of House Bill 2001 is effective in the city of Sandy. So if you were to put an accessory dwelling unit, otherwise known as a grandmother flat or a granny flat or whatever different people call it, the only code, we have code provisions around accessory dwelling units. The only changes that are effective because of House Bill 2001 but haven't been changed in our development code yet is our development code still says there's one required off-street parking per ADU, and it also requires that either the ADU or the main primary house is owner occupied. House Bill 2001 has basically said that we cannot require off-street parking for ADUs and we cannot require owner occupancy for ADUs. So even though our development code still says that, House Bill 2001 basically trumps that, and we're gonna change the code very soon, but we just haven't got around to it yet. The other portion of House Bill 2001 that affects Sandy is duplexes. The bill requires that anywhere that single-family homes can legally be built, that a duplex unit could also be built. However, that is not effective until the city adopts it. However, we must adopt it by June 30th, 2021, or basically House Bill 2001 kicks in and it's adopted, even if we don't. So, but that one does not apply to Bailey Meadows. It's not to say in the future, once we pass that something can be converted to a duplex. I think the House Bill provision would allow that, but at this time, House Bill 2001, as far as duplexes is concerned, is not applicable to the proposal at hand. As far as, we're not reviewing it essentially under those guidelines.
Just a clarification question. The applicant's counsel in his remarks on one place mentioned that the approval criteria and what applies is when the application was submitted,
Right.
which I believe, I'm not sure exactly it says July, on the major application. I'm not sure the exact date, but his point was it predates the effective date of House Bill 2001. So
Do you want to speak to the
so
both of those things?
is it possible that just for that reason, the duplex thing wouldn't apply?
So they wouldn't, no applicant at this point would be able to propose duplexes on subdivision lots as a matter of right until that date that Kelly mentioned. That wouldn't be available to them unless the city were to adopt code language before that, which it could do.
So the code's got to get adopted. could change.
Yeah,
others.
with the exception, though, that I don't remember the exact deadline.
End of June of 2021.
Okay. At the end of June of 2021, if the code hasn't been amended, then the statute applies directly,
Right.
right? The limitations that Kelly mentioned. So they wouldn't be applicable to this subdivision, that is true. But, you know, theoretically in the future, if there would be a lot that would be redeveloped, after that point, then I think probably House Bill 2001, I guess it's not, 2003 comes up, would allow that. So, but not at this point, and not for anything that's coming in until June of 2021.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to I think that's a really good point to bring up. So just to clarify too, that once this is passed, either by June or hopefully when the city adopts it first, any existing lot could be redeveloped to, like, say it's a single-family residential lot with a house on it, and somebody decides that the house value is not worth it anymore, and they knock the house down, they would then be entitled to put a duplex up at some point. Yeah. And that's pretty much all I had. We're free to take any questions you want. That's all I had prepared, though, was basically addressing that information.
Would you mind giving your needed housing little speech, Kelly, again, or David,
Yeah.
between the two of you? Because that's one that, as you mentioned, was mentioned several times, and there is a misconception on what is meant by needed housing. And
So there's actually kind of two components to it. There's the statute that we refer to as the needed housing statute, is 197-307. That's the statute. And it has a number of provisions regarding needed housing. And the term needed housing is defined, and that definition has even been modified over the years. As the definition reads now, it includes housing that has been determined to meet the needs of a city over a 20-year period. So as Kelly mentioned, when the city did its UGB analysis and expansion a few years back, a big part of that process is called a needed housing projection or needed housing analysis. And in that, you have usually a consultant go through and look and say, okay, we are going to forecast what demand is going to be over the next 20 years for various housing types. And the definition then goes on to say, so, you know, that is what really needed housing is looking at, those units. Ultimately, really the things that you would bring into a UGB under Goal 10. And it gets more specific after that, and it talks about including, but not limited to, affordable housing types, low-income housing, stuff that might qualify for the federal low-income housing tax credit program. So the idea with it was, and this is true historically, to make sure that people realized that low-income housing is considered a needed housing type. There's no doubt about that. But it's not currently and historically never was meant to be synonymous with low-income or affordable housing. It's really meant to get at the needs that a city identifies in that planning process, which encompasses all sorts of housing types across a range of incomes. So this property itself was part of that study and was brought into the UGB as land that was determined to meet that 20-year need. Now, the other part of it is the clear and objective requirement. Historically, that was always tied to needed housing. If it's needed housing, must be clear and objective criteria on what we call buildable land, basically land that's not constrained, you know, on steep slopes or, you know, has water feature, something that would, make it difficult to develop or impossible to develop. That statute was changed as well recently, and so now the legislature has said the requirement to have clear and objective criteria applies to housing generally, whether it's needed housing or not. So really, maybe the easiest way to think about a very kind of complex in the weeds issue is that under the current state of the statute, if it's a housing application, of whatever type, needed or not, it has a requirement to have, be reviewed under clear and objective criteria.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody have a question on that? Or any other question for clarification? You did have a question.
I was gonna ask, I heard a lot, and I read a lot of concerns about the traffic impact of the construction. So I wanted to know if there was a rule or code. I saw a lot of things about minimums to put certain signage or lights up, but I never saw anything about a maximum. And I was wondering if there was a rule or a code that described what an intersection maximum count could be at in our code. I could not find one. And I saw suggested by ODOT, they gave suggested parameters around it. I saw some in the traffic analysis done by the outside company, but I didn't know if there was a rule. And I'm speaking specifically to Melissa Avenue, where a lot of people talked about the impact it was gonna have. And I'm wondering if there's anything in code or rules stating that traffic may not be more than for a certain area.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
More, I guess when you're saying traffic, are you talking about average daily trips or
Yeah.
speed or?
Like when I was in there, and I forget what report it was on, they talked about putting the four-way stop sign. They talked about minimum counts per hour over an 8-hour average day.
Yeah.
So if they had the minimum there, I was wondering, is there a maximum that they allow before they would allow further build out into an area?
It's
Does that make
probably a great,
sense?
I think it's probably in the manuals, like the traffic engineers, we're not gonna talk to the applicant, but, that kind of, they referred to their manual, like, where they got their trip counts. Their trip counts is 30%, roughly 2-3% more than the actual trips that were there.
That
I don't
were
know if you
going
noticed
on.
that in the study, but they
Right.
pointed it out in their other ones. So, that's worst case scenario, which isn't uncommon, for somebody who does an analysis, but also in the worst case scenario got to be, well, it got defined, 1,000 got to be codified when all of our testimony came. But at the end of the day, if you look at it more carefully, that was simply based on the manual. So the manual probably was the same way. In other words, you do an analysis and you get to some number, and then it says, okay, recommend a stop sign, or recommend a traffic light, or something like that.
I guess just because I'm rather new to the commission, I'm thinking about even the subdivision I live in, and I think about the traffic counts on it, and somebody wanted to build behind it. And I think we have minimum requirements for putting stop sign up, but I heard a lot of people talking about the amount of traffic that was gonna increase. And I understand because you're gonna build 100 homes, it's gonna increase the traffic. I'm more thinking about that other road, and by adding that Gunderson Road, that would reduce the traffic, but to what level? And before I even get in my mind thinking about that, is there a rule or code that says that you can't build if it creates more traffic in a certain area? And I'm too new to know that, so I wanted to ask
Well,
that.
I've been here for many years, and I had the same question, Commissioner.
Well, I think
So-
that's the answer is
Yeah.
that's no, that's the whole, lots of pages were written by the applicant's attorney and by David.
Right.
Saying, you have, for example, our transportation system plan that says typically, 800 to 1,000 for a local street.
Right.
Okay, but that is not in our code. It doesn't say that you cannot have more than 1,000 trips per day on a local
There was
street.
nothing I found that was definitive, and that's what
Well,
you're saying.
but I think there's a reason for that, you know, if you think about it, they've written quite a bit about the word typical. I'm a mathematician, so think about it. Typical is like the average.
Right.
What's the average? It's made up of small numbers and big numbers, right? So when you say typically 800 to 1,000, you're gonna find a local street that probably has 12 or 1,300.
Right.
You're also gonna find one that's got 500. That's what average means, okay? So, I think that word was probably put in the transportation system plan deliberately, because if you wanted to have a standard, because you know, guidelines you can tend to work with, you're gonna find work with a lot of those, you know, to get objectives met pragmatically. But the minute you start putting, you know, it's 1,000, then you say, what are the assumptions that got you the 1,000? Somebody said 30%, 40%. Well, what if it was 32, 28? You know, you can get paralysis analysis
Right.
kind of a thing. So, you know, you know, what
I
they
just saw a floor, I didn't see the ceiling, and usually if you see a floor, you find the ceiling in a document, I just didn't
So
see
to
it.
answer that is staff has always made we've always taken, and I've stated this publicly before, that 1,000 was the upper, was the not to exceed number in the TSP. So now so the applicant has basically stated numerous times now that because it's not what they believe clear and objective, because it says typically,
Right.
and because it's not located in the development code, that we cannot apply.
Use that as a basis.
I mean, that's the applicant's argument, right?
Right.
I think this applicant's the first one that's challenged the TSP on that I'm aware of in the 9 or 10 years I've been here. And the TSP was written the year, or was adopted the year I started here, so I don't think there was any other application that challenged the 1,080 T limitation that I
Yeah,
recall.
but the examples that he gives, the case law, are more recent too.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the legal opinion is evolving on that, and so, I mean, I see what you're saying.
So one of the problems too is if you were to go back to our development code pre-TSP adoption in 2011, there were, and I don't know about this specific standard, I'd have to look at our old development code, but our development code used to have more direct numbers related in it to development. And what then happened is during the TSP process that lasted from like 2008 to 2011, and we got a TGM grant from ODOT, and they hired different consulting firms. That process and the planning consultant firm that they hired at the time told us to remove that out of our code and just have it in the TSP. So a lot of the provisions got removed from the code 10 years ago or 9 years ago. And so I don't know if this was one of those provisions, but I know that some of these provisions were removed at the insistence of a consulting firm that looked at our code. So I think when we're going back through this new TSP revision, which is gonna be starting here again really soon with another TGM grant, it's gonna be an opportunity to add a lot more provisions back into the development code.
And I would just, sorry, I'm just losing my voice here. The point that Commissioner Carlton made is also valid. Again, we're sort of watch this law kind of develop at light speed here, but for a long time, the code does have a reference, and this is probably how the new TSP was written, to having consistency with the standards, at least the street standards that are in the TSP, in the comprehensive plan is what it says. The most recent sort of case that dealt with that issue of is it in your code or is it in your comprehensive plan and what can be applied to a subdivision, took a much sort of more strict view of the statute to say if you don't have the specific standard, whatever it is, listed, then in Silverton's case, we don't see that as being incorporated into your development standards. So that's a bit of a twist too.
I think that answers it for me, so.
And then the other part of that, I don't know if you were kind of also asking this, but as the Public Works Director laid out in that exhibit, is that you want to have the traffic volumes roughly proportionate at the stop, and that because the one stop's like a dead end right beyond that intersection, that he didn't think it would actually yield equivalent trips at the stop, and that's one of the issues with the four-way stop. The other thing was, I think you mentioned the 500 vehicles per hour. Let me just pull something up here.
Yeah,
The
that
ni-
just sounded like a very prescribed floor for what they,
Yeah.
it has to be more than that to even consider it.
Yeah, and the 500 vehicle, I mean, we gotta remember the new traffic study, which our, whether people agree with it or not, our traffic consultant agreed with that traffic study. And it's basically saying that Melissa Avenue will have a total of 1378 daily trips. So to have 500 in 1 hour,
For an 8-hour period.
I think would have to be a very rare circumstance.
That would have to be an evacuation.
Or, I don't know, yeah, something very odd.
I mean, everybody's leaving at the same time.
Yeah.
But since we're on that, I just wanted to just put one thing out, because I did catch it at the first hearing, and, but, you know, the applicant clarified in their submission that the difference between what they used from the manual and what the actual counts were. And if you look at page 5 of their original traffic study from June of last year, at the very last sentence is, it's based on the ITE rates representing a conservative worst-case analysis. All right, so right above that, they basically have the worst case, and then they have the actual. And they point out that you know, you do the worst case, but what's the most likely situation? Well, 32%. So I did some simple calculations and said, right now, you know, with Gunderson Road, it says 1160 would be going down. You know, that's existing on Melissa right now, 1160. That's what they're saying, okay. But if we apply the 68% versus the worst case to the 100 homes that are being planned, and if you split them out just the way that they split them out, that puts, because keep in mind, when the second exit to Gunderson Road gets there, some of the people from Nicholas Glen are gonna go out that way if their destination is out that way. That's an assumption. I got that the Melissa would have 1197. It'd have 27 more trips a day if you assume the actual trip counts, not the worst case scenario. So like I said earlier, I'm a mathematician, so you can stump me on English in a heartbeat. But when it comes to numbers, you know, I'll probably get into it, start looking around a little bit, et cetera. So I'm not trained to be a traffic engineer, and I don't know if that's, but I mean, that's, what I'm trying to point out is the importance of Gunderson Road, number one, and they've all figured that out. To me, the win-win of this whole thing is to, one, accept the fact that that piece of property that's in the urban growth boundary is gonna get developed. That's why it's in the urban growth boundary, just like every other piece of land that's in the urban growth boundary that's zoned. The question is how? SFR is actually the least dense. So if you were to, I mean, several people have made these comments that, oh, we should be putting affordable homes there. Well, what's affordable? That's gonna be rezoning it to R2 or R3. Now you got more traffic because you have more houses. You know, so you gotta be careful what you ask for, you might get it, to some extent. And the reason it's SFR is if you go back to our urban growth study, which we held hearings, and we had a group of folks like this testifying in the fall of 2016, on the topic council on February 17th. Almost everybody came up and they were in favor of it. Nobody from Nicholas Glen showed up and said, wait a minute, they're planning on putting houses behind, we don't want that, or any other place in town. Now, you know, so there's a process by which the city has developed their urban growth boundary, which, I mean, lots of time and staff, you know, went in it, and it's not like a snap decision, you know. So, you know, I just, you know, my whole focus right now is I understand the legal arguments of both councils. I got smarter than I have in the last year, because we just were boring stuff here at times, but, you know, you kinda got us thinking on this one. Is to figure out how the Gunderson Road thing can be done in a way that we think that the probability that it's gonna happen is really high. That's, you know, what's the hammer to make sure Gunderson Road gets done? That's where I think our energy should be, which is the second hearing, obviously. Because the other thing that if I listen to what both councils have said, which I read everybody's comment, but at the end of the day, you gotta recognize that as commissioners, if we don't listen to our legal counsel, we're a little nuts. And, you know, legal counsel has shared with us, you know, the basis that we would or would not have to deny this application, which that doesn't appear to be, you know, one that would stand legal muster, in my opinion. Is that if we did deny it, it would get appealed to council, it'd just keep working its way up, and legal fees would just continue to get
Okay.
accelerated.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna probably find me saying that there is no set of circumstances under which you could ever deny this and not, you know, you go through LUBA cases and you sometimes shake your head at how something that seemed laid out is suddenly now sort of different. You know, so I don't think it's fair to say that, you know, my advice would be that there is you know, you can't deny this, it will absolutely be, you know, remanded or reversed. However, when you look at what has come out, particularly recently, some changes to the statute, I think that is a much more challenging route to take. That is true.
Yeah, you never say never or whatever, but at the end of the day, you put a probability on it, and I read all your legal arguments, and they make sense to me.
Jerry, I have a question.
Yeah.
What's kind of our process? Because it seems like we're kind of getting into deliberation, or are we gonna, is there more from the city to come? Is this
No, I
open
think
discussion time?
You're done with your formal presentation, correct? So we're in
Yeah.
deliberation now with questions being asked by, or to staff. Which I did have one, if you could walk us through I mean, we have it and read it, but it's also good to have it spoken. The thing of, with Gunderson and the trigger and what happens if, it doesn't go through, or if it does, and just, can you
Yeah.
Well, that-
refresh us on that,
Yeah, I'll let David do most of that.
on that scenario?
But what I will say is that keep in mind that everything in the staff report right now is just recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's recommendations based on what staff feels is the best way forward to get the best result for everybody.
Mhm.
That being said, Planning Commission is not bound to any of our conditions, findings, and recommendations. So
True.
I want to be very clear too that this is this is staff recommendation. David
Mhm.
and myself are the two main people that have been reviewing this document. But by no means does that bound you to stick with the conditions as written in this document.
Right.
I just want to be very clear for the
Right.
public too, that you're not bound to these conditions.
Mhm.
So these conditions can go forward with exactly as staff has proposed them, or with modifications as Planning Commission sees fit.
Yeah.
So, Gunderson Road currently is tied to the fact that there would be a UGB expansion, and then an annexation after that, and then after that, Gunderson Road would be installed. And
Also a development agreement executed. So it has that aspect of it as well. That was.
and a jurisdictional transfer of the highway.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of dominoes here. There's
Mhm.
Well, that's
no
one of
doubt.
I'm not looking so much for an answer, but that's one of the things of interpreting what's before us is, kind of look at the letter of the law, right? We're trying to apply the letter of the law here, or the development code. And when I go through, it's like, is Gunderson, is it gonna go through or not? And,
It's contingent upon other things happening.
right, so.
That's true.
And so trying to make a basis or a decision You know, kind of looking at worst case, if it doesn't go through, there's many things that, if it doesn't go through, that I would question. So, and I know we're gonna come to something tonight, but I also like to say, I think, I was talking to Jerry earlier, my reason for being here, I think for all of us, is I love this town. I like all my fellow commissioners here, we're free of charge, per se, and we're here to make this town as livable and as best as it can be for all the people that live here and work here. And my job is not to safeguard the city. I'm looking at how best to apply the development code and ensure the livability of Sandy for all of you. So, but we do have a process that we have to go through, and again, it's not to protect the city, but we're gonna go through with the city and follow the process that's there. So anyway, I'm not sure if I stated it correctly, but.
No.
And to be very clear, this staff recommendation, at least from my end, is not to protect the city either. My recommendation is based on if the applicant is correct in their assumptions on if this went to LUBA, that I would rather see Gunderson Road and the park both be installed than see the subdivision go through with neither Gunderson or the park. So that's why the recommendation is laid out as it is. I'm not really looking at, from the Development Services Director position, I'm not really looking at it through litigation eyes. That's not really my obligation, but I am looking at it as, how do we get the best outcome for Nicholas Glen neighborhood residents, the city, and in some respects, the applicant. So I'm just kind of looking at all of those things together, and that's what led us to the recommendation before you tonight.
I noticed a lot of people suggested that we condition the UGB expansion into the approval of this application.
Yeah.
Now, knowing of the recent case law, even if it didn't go through, and it almost seems like there's an outside chance that's a very small percentage of chance of happening, right, if it not going through. But if it didn't go through, recent case law would almost say, if we dictated, right, if we put that condition in there, it could be overturned, possibly.
Yes. Yeah, you need to have a basis to say to somebody that you have to go out and expand the UGB. A lot of this is, as Kelly said, I think, not necessarily easy to swallow. I get that. It's been, a lot of work. You do have, a willingness from an applicant to try to make something work, albeit under terms that probably we would want to be different if we could. But, there is the other possibility or chance that either, they don't offer any of those things. We're left to say, okay, well, what is the basis here where, particularly on those cases that I've talked about, where, yeah, there's a lot of traffic there, but what's the code criteria that could really serve as a defensible basis for denial? And I think also looking at it, and, maybe this is just sort of sunny optimism, which I'm not always known for, by the way. But, it is something that is a connection that the city's TSP at least has envisioned. It's not as if it is just sort of like, wow, we're just gonna put this road out there and have really no basis for doing it other than, trying to, thin a very, a very narrow needle. I mean, there is a basis in your TSP for it, and so there's an opportunity from that point of view as well. But
So Chair, I would ask one more question then. What you're saying is, are we at an impasse then with time when it comes to making a decision concerning this application versus the decision of the UGB on Gunderson?
what's the timing that's driving?
Yeah, so the UGB decision would may or may not make a change for my decision in something I've read, and I'm wondering if I can't hold off to make this decision on this application until the UGB.
I see what you're saying.
So are we out of time that way?
Well, you have to factor in for this application, a deadline, that is now, what, April
April 14th. I believe.
14th, I think. But that would also allow for an appeal, to the city council, notice for that hearing. The applicant has also indicated that they, need decisions by the end of March. So there is a deadline on this application, that does drive a lot of the timing.
And the UGB expansion, the decision on that wouldn't be until it goes through our process, the county's process, and then I'm assuming there's
The
even
city,
an appeal
the
period on
council.
that? Yeah.
I mean, this, for as many people, much energy we had over the last 2 meetings for people testifying against the proposal, you turn that energy around, and every one of those people showed up at the council and the county to say, we want this urban growth expansion, which I think they do. What would be the basis for this council or the county to say, well, no, I mean, it's a few acres, whatever, and if everybody shows up and says they're for it, it's, you can't say it's done till it's done, right, David? But at the end of the day, you kind of go into these things, with a certain probability, trust the process to some extent. And at this point, I don't see anything with a high probability that would kill this whole thing, as we've got it kind of lined out if we just pursue it. It could
Yeah,
happen,
I mean,
but what's the probability?
The UGB issue, is something that, I think we would know at this point whether there was, opposition from groups that commonly have concerns about UGB expansions. Who are those? So, 1,000 Friends is a group that maybe you're all familiar with on some level at least, and they've been around since the early 70s, and their mission really is to, it's broader than this, but I think it's fair to say preserve agricultural land, and make sure that UGBs, where urban growth happens, more or less stays as small as possible. I mean, that may not be their stated mission, but I think that's pretty clearly how they approach things. And so, to my knowledge, they get notice of this, the state gets notice of it, and the state passes out notice of all UGB expansions to groups that ask for notice, and a group like 1,000 Friends would certainly be on that list. The state itself, DLCD, often has a lot of comments, as maybe some of you remember from the city's own experience with its last urban growth boundary expansion. They were ultimately supportive, but so, without having negative comments from groups that would typically have a lot to say, and would certainly, be the first ones to speak up and say, hey, we have concerns about this UGB expansion for this reason, I think there is basis to be optimistic about that. But you're right, that it's
Yeah,
never
well,
kind of over.
To me, the key is focus the energy towards making things happen as opposed to trying to get them to not happen. That's kind of the key thing, because at some point, this place is gonna develop. Let's make it work, the best way that we can. And so, if you think about when this first was thought about and suggested last summer, I mean, the people I'm thinking about in the audience and Nicholas Glenn and where we are today, there's a lot of discussion, conversation. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge that's gone on, and people are now much more aware and knowledgeable, and you kind of get past the shock factor into, kind of in the solution. And I think that's what the applicant's trying to do, with it. It's just, we knew this was all gonna be there when we were doing the urban growth expansion, and I said, shoot, why don't we just take it all the way to the highway? Because I know as I drive down 211 and I look up, and you can see the back end of Nicholas Glen, I just assumed that developed, it'd come out to 211. It just seems the most logical thing, you could go and walk to it, right? So, we just brought the urban growth boundary right to 211, just because it's a natural boundary.
Yeah, it's not as simple as that, actually,
Yeah.
if you look
Well-
back about how it all occurred.
Yeah, well, I got the map here, you know, we had some numbers there, but we could have, a few acres, we could have done that maybe.
Yeah, I won't go into how it all occurred, but,
Yeah.
it was a little bit complicated, I will say.
But Commissioner Carlton, I agree that it's gonna happen sooner than later. I mean, that's why the area is brought in, and my concern going through with the staff development is really for the existing people that are out there is the livability through this process. And how to ensure that it's the best that we can be. I don't think we all kinda got the fact that it's coming,
Yeah.
Right.
okay? So if Gunderson's delayed, et cetera, and we've got the 100 homes in there, you know, cause I read through it says that the 100 homes can be built, you just can't, it'll stop at the